Have you ever played chess with the black pieces and thought, oh, I am behind a move, white starts, how can I get the initiative? How can I make a great attack? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Here is an example of a crazy, brilliant attacking player saying, I will take the initiative with the black pieces, and there are some cool tricks on how to do that in the game. So we see pawn to d4 on the first move. We are in Baku in 1951, and the player with the white pieces is Lilienthal, one of the top players in the world from that time. Knight to f6 by the lead character for tonight, Rashid Nezhmetdinov, the brilliant attacking genius from the USSR who even Mikhail Tal feared. We see pawn to c5, a very standard opening development. Pawn to d6, a little bit of a different sort of move. Instead, normally we probably see something like pawn to e6, but we see pawn to d6, and this is all about how to gain the initiative with black. Knight comes to c3 for white, and here we see the point. Pawn to e5. How is this a brilliant attacking move? Because the main variation, the first thing we always think about in a situation is in a situation like this is, what if I just capture that pawn? So let's look at that variation. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, which allows white to play queen takes queen with check, king takes queen, and with the queens off the board, we would normally think that the attacking potential of black has been greatly diminished. It has, but this position is very drawish. It's very hard to show any kind of initiative for white. In fact, the modern chess computers evaluate this and say this is completely equal. White has lost all opening advantage. There's no pressure here. So by playing in this way, Rashid Nezhmetdinov, the brilliant attacking player, is saying, now you can make a choice, my dear opponent. You can either get a game where I don't get any attacking chances, but you will waste a white in this tournament. You will also never get any attacking chances, and it will be a draw. You can choose that, or you can choose to play the main line, the best move, which keeps the position alive, knight to f3, but that is also a move that allows black to get in the counterplay. And that is what Lilienthal plays. Now we see knight from b to d7. Just continuing development. The crazy sacrifices and brilliant flashy moves has not quite begun yet, but we are getting there. Pawn to g3 from white, making ready to fianchetto this bishop. And now pawn on e5 takes pawn on d4, the first blot on the board. This pawn is recaptured by the knight. Knight on f3 takes d4 and g6 by black, also preparing to fianchetto their kingside bishop. Everything develops according to plan in very usual fashion, as long as it lasts. Bishop comes to g2, the traditional fianchetto. Bishop comes to g7, the traditional fianchetto, attacking the longest diagonal, very usual fashion, white castles their king to safety. In quotation marks, black also castles their king. And we see pawn to b3 now. So the idea of this move is to counteract this bishop here on g7, this very strong bishop, by putting this bishop on b2. But Nezhmetdinov has some very cool plans for this bishop, and you will see it play a major and beautiful, very well prepared role in the oncoming onslaught. For now, we see knight coming to c5. So already looking at some key squares in white's camp, although of course black is lacking just a little bit in development, but nothing too serious. And white is saying, get out of my house. Don't come attack me. Of course, Lilienthal knew the reputation of Nezhmetdinov, this brilliant sacrificial chess wizard or maniac. Get out of my house. He placed pawn to b4 with an attack on the knight. Get away. And no problem. The knight comes back to e6, offering a trade. Do you want to capture my knight? And I can recapture with the bishop, and again the position will be completely equal. White will have lost all edge. So the grandmaster cannot really allow that. Lilienthal can't allow that, and instead retreats the knight to b3, which is the best move, but it is also the most risky. The knight dance continues. So neglecting development a little bit of these pieces, what could be the point? Knight from f6 coming to d7. Well, we want to have these knights at their optimal squares. But doesn't this give white a lot of time to play moves like bishop coming to b2? Doesn't this look absolutely amazing? Full development, full king safety, two fianchettoed bishops on their optimal squares. It looks so strong. Well, yes, but there is a weak square. Knight comes from d7 to e5, and this knight is extremely hard to kick away, because if you play a move like pawn to f5 to kick this knight away, oops, this diagonal towards the king will be very weak. This bishop may want to go to this diagonal at some point. Also, the knight threatens the c4 pawn here, so Lilienthal has to react to that. And now we start something I just love in chess. A series of very unconventional moves. Knight coming to a4, a5. Knight coming to a5, defending this. And they say a knight on the rim is dim, because this knight does not have very many squares it can go to. However, it is the best move. But the dance of knights continue. The knight here comes to d4, and there's a little trick. Is this protected? Can't white just come in and capture it? Well, what is the tactic, the deadly tactic that black can use to win the queen immediately? Knight f3 with check. So recapture the knight, but this got out of the way of the sniper bishop. Sniper bishop captures the queen, and of course black has a winning game. So we have the knights here, and the queen here. There is no queen takes knight, but instead The best move, which was found by Grandmaster Lilienthal, is this other knight coming to the rim. Knight to a4, now also using this bishop to attack the knight. So these are the best moves, but there is a lot of risk involved with these knights. They are very far away from the center and even further away from the king. And we know that Nezhmetdinov is looking at the king always. He plays pawn to c5. And what he wants to do is destabilize this part of the board. This is a big dare. A big, big dare. Again, he's saying what you have to do to keep the initiative and the advantage as white now is to play this very, very tough move. Knight coming to b7, capturing on b7. It is protected by the bishop, but there is this crazy line that Nezhmetdinov and also Lilienthal calculated that begins with knight on d coming to f3. And if we capture that, it just looks like a sacrifice, well then the bishop can no longer see the knight, and the knight takes here. Bishop takes the knight, rather coordinating an attack on f3 with these two pieces. This is the way to go, but it is extremely, extremely risky. So this dare was not accepted by Lilienthal. He had played the perfect move up until this point, but it looked so risky to go in for this sacrifice that he instead chose to defend his pawn here with the move pawn to a3. And that is the inaccuracy that Nezhmetdinov had been waiting for. He now completes his development, bishop coming out to g4 with an attack on the pawn right here on e2. This knight also attacks on e2, so it is really, really tough to defend this pawn. So what Lilienthal chooses to do is, again the best move by the way, to capture this knight with the bishop. So now the very strong forward knight has been eliminated, but also this bishop here, the dark squared bishop that was supposed to counteract this dark squared bishop, has been lost in the process. Pawn on c5 takes the bishop on d4, and now there's a lot of pieces in the way. This one, and this one are all in the way for a check to land on the king from this bishop. But this bishop has gotten stronger. You just have to have Nezhmetdinov level of foresight to understand how. And in this game, we will explore just how. Lilienthal continues with the best moves. He now plays pawn to h3, challenging this bishop, and the bishop drops back to e6. Looking at this c4 pawn, it is defended once, but it is attacked twice. Again, this is a dare. The way to react here would be knight takes b7. Knight coming to b7 is the key idea for white to get out of all of this, but it looks so dangerous. Doesn't it just win a pawn? No, because the answer would be queen to d7 with a double attack. Attacking the knight would have to move to be saved. So queen attacks the knight, and the queen and the bishop battery attacks h3, and the bishop attacks c4. So if you, for instance, play something like pawn to c5, we could see something like bishop takes h3, bishop takes, queen takes the knight, and the material will be won back. And these complications was simply too much for Lilienthal. It looked too dangerous for his poor king, and that is why he didn't prioritize to get his knight back into the game via the only route that it really can. So this is the position, and here he played the mistake. He played pawn to c5 immediately, so now it's out of the attack of these two pieces, and he thought, now I can use these pieces to attack here, because he can't really move this, because I would hang the rook here in the corner. But Nezhmetdinov has a very specific idea, and that is to not really care about the conventional valuation of the pieces. The best move was pawn to b6, and that is not the move. Like, the only inaccurate move from black in this game is actually here, where he plays pawn to b5. It ends up being about the same, but he gave Lilienthal an optional little window to try to avoid a pawn coming to b6, because technically you could still go to b7 with the knight. There's no time to capture this knight because we are moving with an attack on the queen, and there's a whole complication where black is only a little bit better. But all the way back in 1951, Lilienthal knew his chess memes, and of course en passant is forced. En passant makes it possible in this move to play, in this position rather, to play pawn takes en passant on b6, capturing this pawn in the process. If you don't know about that rule, I promise you it is a real move in chess. It is called en passant, and this allows the pawn to come to b6. A takes b6, and now the knight is attacked once again. But wait a minute. Bishop takes the rook. The rook is traditionally worth 5 points. The bishop only 3 points. So isn't black giving up material here? Queen takes bishop. Yes, black is indeed giving up material, but we saw how he played, how Nezhmetdinov played to first make this bishop very strong, and having this control of the dark square diagonal. Now let's take a look at the light squares in the position. Now that the light squared bishop, or was it this one? Can't remember. One of these two was the light squared bishop. By getting the light squared bishop out of the game, even sacrificing the exchange to get there, because with regards to the king, no protection of the light squares is really offered now. So the bishop looking at this light square, h3, and the queen looking at g2, a possible checkmate threat. But it's white to move, and white can play knight takes b6 with an attack on the queen, no time to capture the h3 pawn. But the light squares are weak, and therefore the queen slides up to a6, looking at these light squares and also attacking this knight. So the knight jumps back again on the rim, and these knights are not very effective anymore. It didn't journey to b7 at the moment, the last moment it had the chance to. And after this move, it's black to move, and now we can pounce on the light squares. Bishop takes h3. Beautiful. Beautiful attacking the rook. And there's no time really to move the rook out of the attack, because we could slide the queen back, and you look at the awesome power of this checkmate threat. And what could white really do in this position after the queen comes back here? And something very similar to this actually happens in the game. So we will take a look at the major pattern of attack just in a little while. For now, we should just note that there is no time to move the rook. Instead, rook to c1 is played, getting this last piece into the attack. And now it's time for some of that magical Nezhmetdinov foresight once again. So this bishop is absolutely excellent. He's not going to capture this rook. No, he's looking at the weak light squares around the white majesty. But how about the long-term goal of this bishop, the dark squared bishop? It would very much like to come in and attack this king as well, but there are 1, 2, 3 pieces in the way, 2 black and 1 white. How to deal with that to get this bishop into the game? Brilliant, brilliant move. Pawn to d3. Quite simply making room for the bishop. Pawn takes pawn though, so still a lot of pieces are in the way. But the queen slides back. Now this checkmate is threatened. And there's only really one way to stop this checkmate threat, and that is to play f3. So just in a couple of moves, we have made it so there are no longer 3 pieces in the way for the bishop, but only one, namely this one. Can we maybe move this out of the way with a great threat? Yes, we can. We can play knight, and that is what Nezhmetdinov did. Play knight to g4. Looks like a sacrifice, but you cannot capture this, because queen coming to g2 is checkmate on the light squares. So, how can we now stop this knight from coming to e3 with a fork on these 2 pieces, and not just winning the exchange, but the entire rook? How can we stop that? Here is what Lilienthal tried. He played knight coming to c4, looking here at the d3 square, so that knight can't really come here because it would just be captured. But the foresight of Nezhmetdinov has paid off. He has paved the way for his bishop to come in with the attack. Bishop slides in with a devastating check on d4 against the king. The king goes to h1, since that is almost the only legal move. You could interpose the rook. We could just capture that, being protected by the knight. You could interpose the knight. We could also just capture that, and it wouldn't make any difference, except white would lose more pieces. Therefore, king to h1 is forced. We have all these nice attacking pieces. We would like also to have the queen in the attack. So a powerful centralizing move, queen coming to d5. This threatens queen coming to h5, and that means that, for instance, a bishop coming here would reveal this check against the king, ending in checkmate. So there is this huge threat of queen coming to h5. Rook to c2 is trying to look at some way of blocking something happening here on h2. But just bishop takes rook on f1, and that is actually the final move of the game. Here white resigned, but I'm not going to cheat you from how the game would have ended, because we're actually very close to a forced checkmate. Of course, we have this checkmate threat going on, and if we try to, for instance, capture the bishop with the queen, well, queen coming to h5, and that is either you move the king and you are checkmated like so, or you play the only, because of the bishop here you can come here, so the only other move would be queen coming here, and now we checkmate like this. So that was the end of the game, and I hope you enjoyed it. I sure did. If you like the pieces here and you want to buy them, or the chessboard, or both for yourself, there's a link in the description that gives you a discount. I also have a Patreon if you just want to support my work making these ASMR chess videos. And thank you so much for watching. I had a great time. I hope you did as well. I hope I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.